Willie Nelson hasn't just lived a long life, he's lived multiple lifetimes. At 91, he survived financial disasters, personal betrayals, drug busts, and even being blacklisted by the music industry. Yet, through it all, he carved out his legacy as one of the greatest country legends ever. His journey has been a whirlwind of triumphs and scandals, controversies, affairs, and bitter feuds with Nashville's elite. But when he looks back on the people who shaped his life, one name rises above them all: Kris Kristofferson. For years, whispers have surrounded Nelson and Kristofferson's tangled history. Were they allies or secret rivals? Did jealousy, betrayal, or competition ever drive a wedge between them? And why did they sometimes drift apart, despite being at the heart of the outlaw country movement? It's time to dig into the truth. But first, let's go back to the beginning, where Willie and Kris rewrote the rules of country music forever. By the late 1960s, Nashville ran country music with an iron grip. The industry was a well-oiled machine controlling everything: how songs sounded, how artists dressed, even how they spoke and carried themselves. There was a strict formula: clean-cut looks, classic instrumentation, and lyrics that stuck to heartbreak, booze, and small-town nostalgia. The Grand Ole Opry and powerful radio execs handpicked the stars, and anyone daring to step out of line, they were tossed aside without a second thought. But Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson had no interest in playing by those rules. For Willie, the battle had been exhausting. He arrived in Nashville in the late 50s with dreams of stardom, only to find himself stuck behind the scenes, churning out songs for other artists. He wrote massive hits like Crazy for Patsy Cline and Hello Walls for Faron Young. But when it came to his own music, Nashville execs had no clue what to do with him. He wasn't polished like Hank Snow, nor was he the smooth-talking heartthrob they craved. His voice was raw, his style unpredictable, and his vision for country music way too bold for the industry gatekeepers. Kristofferson, on the other hand, was a rebel of a completely different breed, a war hero turned poet, a Rhodes Scholar who could have had a cushy career in the military or academia, but instead, he chose to mop floors at Columbia Studios just to be near the music scene. His songs were way too deep for radio hits, packed with raw emotion and heavy themes of war, regret, and existential turmoil. Nashville had no idea what to do with him. While most country artists were crooning about booze and broken hearts, Kristofferson was diving into human suffering, guilt, and self-reflection. He and Willie, they were the misfits Nashville didn't know how to handle. Then came 1970 and Kristofferson's legendary moment of defiance. He hijacked a National Guard helicopter and landed it straight onto Johnny Cash's front lawn, all to hand him a demo of Sunday Morning Coming Down. Cash didn't just listen, he felt it. He performed the song live on his show, and suddenly, it became the anthem of a generation drowning in disillusionment. Overnight, Kristofferson went from being ignored to being the hottest name in country music. The same industry that had written him off, now they were desperate to cash in on his success. Meanwhile, Willie Nelson was drowning in failure. RCA Records kept shoving him into the Nashville mold, forcing him into stiff suits, slicking back his hair, and trying to make him palatable for conservative audiences. They buried his raw sound under orchestral arrangements, desperately trying to turn him into something he wasn't. But it wasn't working. His albums were flopping, and despite writing hit after hit for others, his own music was going nowhere. He was exhausted, frustrated, on the verge of walking away from it all. Then came a turning point. Kristofferson, now a rising star, saw what Nashville was wasting. He knew the industry would never truly embrace Willie for who he was, so he gave him the best advice of his life: get out of Nashville. Head to Texas. Something wild was happening there. Country music was shifting, breaking free from the industry's grip. In places like Austin and Luckenbach, a revolution was brewing, one led by long-haired cowboys, bikers, and hippies who wanted something real, something grittier than the clean-cut country radio hits. Willie took the gamble. He packed his bags, left Nashville behind, and moved to Austin. And there, he finally found his people, an audience that embraced him. Rough edges, poetic soul, and all. He ditched the suits, grew out his hair and beard, and played to packed-out crowds who didn't care if he had a radio hit. Texas gave him what Nashville never would: freedom. It was in Austin that Willie stopped being a struggling songwriter and became the face of a movement. He and Kristofferson weren't just two misfits anymore. They had become pioneers, trailblazers of a new sound that rejected Nashville's polished formulas in favor of raw, rebellious, real country music. By the time the 1970s hit full throttle, the outlaw movement was in full swing, and Willie and Kris were at its core. But beneath the camaraderie, one question lingered. Was Willie jealous of Kris? For years, whispers followed their friendship, hinting at an unspoken rivalry. Country music had always been a battlefield, artists clawing for recognition, radio play, and devoted fans. But the tension between Willie and Kris, it wasn't about clashing egos or bad blood. It was something deeper. It was about timing, frustration, and that gnawing feeling of being left behind. Kristofferson was Nashville's golden boy, the kind of artist who made success look effortless. He was a poet, an intellectual, a man who could shift between music, literature, and film without breaking a sweat. Critics adored him. Industry executives who once dismissed him now couldn't get enough. He had the perfect mix of credibility and mainstream appeal. Even when Nashville frowned at his raw, rule-breaking songwriting, they still respected him. But Willie, in those early years, the industry never gave him that same recognition. And for a man who had spent decades fighting to be heard, watching Kris soar to the top so fast had to sting, even just a little. Meanwhile, Willie was still battling to be recognized as more than just a songwriter. He had penned some of country music's biggest hits, yet the industry still saw him as a behind-the-scenes figure, not a star. Nashville's record labels kept trying to force him into a box, polishing him up into a clean-cut, radio-friendly act, but no matter how hard they tried, it just didn't stick. His album struggled to gain traction, and every small victory seemed to be met with an even bigger set. Kristofferson, on the other hand, was soaring. He was racking up Grammys, performing on national television, and even conquering Hollywood. By the mid-1970s, he had landed a leading role in the 1976 blockbuster A Star is Born, opposite Barbra Streisand. He wasn't just a country artist anymore, he was a full-blown movie star, proving that success in music could translate to the big screen. And Willie, stuck on the sidelines watching it all unfold, he had to be wondering, when is it going to be my turn? For years, Kristofferson had everything Willie craved: respect, awards, and a career that stretched beyond country music. While Willie was stuck in Nashville's shadow, known more for writing hits for others than for himself, Kris was out there winning Grammys and starring in Hollywood films. But in 1973, everything changed. Willie had enough. He was done playing by Nashville's rules and decided to take back control of his destiny. He walked away from Music City and returned to Texas, embracing the true version of himself. Gone were the tailored suits and clean-shaven look. He let his hair and beard grow wild, embracing the rugged outlaw image that would soon become legendary. Then came Shotgun Willie. This wasn't just another album, it was a declaration. With it, Willie Nelson was no longer just a behind-the-scenes songwriter. He was a rebel, a trailblazer, and a star in his own right. From that moment on, he wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting the rules. And just like that, the tables turned. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Willie Nelson wasn't just a star, he was a phenomenon. He was packing stadiums, dropping hit after hit, and steering the country music revolution on his own terms. The same industry that once dismissed him was now at his feet. But as Willie soared to superstardom, one question lingered. Was Kristofferson jealous? Some say yes. Hollywood, the media, and mainstream audiences who once couldn't get enough of Kristofferson were suddenly more fascinated with Willie. The same intellectual, poetic edge that made Kris a Nashville outsider was now overshadowed by Willie's larger-than-life persona, and while Willie's fame exploded, Kristofferson's momentum slowed. His music wasn't hitting like before, and his once thriving acting career grew unpredictable. Behind the scenes, he was battling his own demons: alcoholism, failed relationships, and a reputation for being difficult. But their biggest rift? It wasn't just about fame or fortune, it was about a woman. A love triangle that nearly destroyed everything. Here's what most people don't know. Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson weren't just connected by music. They were connected by a woman. And not just any woman. Rita Coolidge. Rita was a force in the industry, talented, stunning, and absolutely unforgettable. Her voice had graced collaborations with legends like Eric Clapton and Leon Russell. In 1973, she married Kristofferson, and their relationship was as fiery as it was fragile. The passion was undeniable, but so were the jealousy, infidelity, and emotional battles that followed. Kristofferson was madly in love with her, but his reckless drinking and volatile temper pushed their marriage to the breaking point. But here's a twist. Long before Kristofferson, there were whispers that Rita had a romantic history with Willie Nelson. Neither Willie nor Rita ever confirmed it, but the rumors refused to die. Had Willie and Kris fallen for the same woman? And if so, did it drive a wedge between them forever? That being said, looking back on their decades of friendship, Willie Nelson has never shied away from acknowledging just how much Kris Kristofferson shaped his life and music. Even now, Willie keeps their legacy alive, making sure that the songs they created together continue to inspire new generations. But their story is more than just music and collaboration. It's a testament to friendship, resilience, and the power of artists who refuse to conform. Willie and Kris didn't just make country music, they redefined it, and their legacy, it's legendary.